Okay, let's open in a word of prayer here. One second here. Okay, let's pray. Father, we thank you for this day. Pray that you'll bless our time together today, that you will give us ears to hear, hearts to understand, as we look at some of the things that are going on in the world today and how they relate, we believe, to your prophetic plan for the ages. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, this week, as I mentioned last week, Pam and I moved this week. We finally got all of our stuff to the house on Friday, and it's a mess. That's why you're not seeing Pam today. I think she came with me. I don't know. I haven't got to that box yet, but if any of you were praying that I would find my belt, that prayer has been answered. I did find my belt just as I was walking out the door. And so it's a mess at our house. So pray for Pam. She's very, very tired. There's just like little pieces of things, like we found our dishes, but no silverware. We found other stuff. And it's like we're wandering around the house hoping that X-ray vision would help if we could see what was inside some of those boxes. And if some of you have been over to the house and you know there's a pile of boxes everywhere. And I'm not sure how that happened. I'm not sure how we got all that. So I'm titling this today, Some Assembly Required, because that's sort of the bane of my existence right now. We bought some patio furniture so that when you want to come over for dinner, you know, we'll provide the salad. You bring the steaks. I like New York strips, by the way. And so I assembled like 3 tables and then a couple end tables and a coffee table. And then I got to the chairs. And the box says, Some Assembly Required. And I'm sure that there's somebody in Vietnam laughing hilariously about how he designed this thing to frustrate people in America and occupy a lot of their time. Because if that's some assembly required, then, well, it's not some assembly required. But look, we talk each week about the convergence of events, and although I had less time this week to work on things and look at them, it was pretty clear that as I just sort of was kind of picking little bits of pieces from here and there about all the things that are going on, it's a very chaotic world. I won't even begin to scratch the surface today. There are a lot of things going on. And I laugh every week about this foreign policy cover from a few years back, probably 6 or 7, 8 years ago now. A world disrupted. And can we fix this? And these were back in the salad days of the early 2010 decade, when everything seemed, we were just dealing with the remnants of a major financial crisis. Now it seems like everywhere you look, there's a crisis of something. Politics, culture, church, religion, that type of thing. I keep meaning to mention this, by the way, so I apologize that I have not. My updates are also being carried now on a new channel, Remnant Truth Network, rtn.org. A number of us have put this together because we're not sure how much longer we're going to be on platforms like YouTube and Facebook and that sort of thing. So everything is put on servers that run independent of the big social media fascists that want to control everything, that want to control the message. So if you want to check that out, we also have, I'm not sure if it's rolled out yet or not. We have an app that's either out or coming that you can download to your phone, and you can access everything on your phone. So rtn.org, Remnant Truth Network. And there are a number of us there, and we have a statement of faith, and we're trying to monitor what goes up. obviously concerned about the truth, even though, we will admit, all of us that are involved with that project are flawed human beings. But what's going on with the social media platforms is pretty amazing. And I may allude to this a little bit later if I remember, but if not, I'll just say it now. They're trying to control the message. Big advertisers are withdrawing from Facebook because Facebook is allowing content up that they don't agree with. And this is the very definition of fascism. I think this week, Disney withdrew all of its advertising from Facebook. And Facebook, so as a result, Facebook has had a pretty significant drop in revenue because corporations are saying, if you're going to allow somebody up that doesn't agree with, say, Black Lives Matter or criticizes Black Lives Matter, then we don't want any part of your platform. We don't want our advertising there. And what they don't understand is that advertising on that network is not an endorsement of everything that is put up on YouTube. That's a ridiculous assumption, but given the host of ridiculous assumptions that I see made all the time these days by people, you wonder how they got employed. I'm serious. I've never, you're going to see some examples of this. So I want to start with this. This does relate a little bit to the title today, Some Assembly Required. In Hebrews chapter 10, Paul, one of my favorite books of the Bible, because it talks about the supremacy of Christ and his sacrifice, and that his sacrifice was perfect and complete once. Paul says this, well, I said the assumption is by a lot of people that Paul wrote this. I'm not certain that Paul wrote this. So the writer of Hebrews says this, let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promised. And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works. By the way, the provoking there is unto love and to good works, not just provoking. There's read the rest of the sentence. It's easy to provoke. It's to provoke unto love and to good works. And listen, when I criticize someone or say something like this, I'm always thinking of what I say too. But then this, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. And I think we're at that time in history. And there's a very specific admonition in Scripture that we are not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together. And listen, this is a very difficult issue. So this is Andy Stanley at North Point, and I've been critical of Andy Stanley, as you know, in some of the things that he said in the past. And North Point, as with a number of churches, I drive up here on Sunday morning, a little closer now than it was, but drive by a number of churches and they're not meeting. And they haven't met since, March or February? And we didn't meet for a while either, so it's a difficult situation to deal with, and so I don't want to be judgmental of people, but North Point announced this week they have probably 25 to 30,000 of attendance on their 7 campuses each week, that they would not be meeting the rest of the year. And this is going to be true. I mean, it's a strange dystopian world that we live in. I mean, I used to live close to Muirfield Village where they had, 2 golf tournaments the last 2 weeks and no fans out there. And you could see things see from one hole to the next hole that you usually can't see out at that golf course because there's people all over the place. And it has a huge economic impact. I'm fairly convinced there won't be college football this fall. I doubt that there'll be college basketball. I don't think we'll see baseball this year. And the NFL, if you still care about them, they certainly don't care about you. If you do care to continue to watch them, I think they're toast for this year. But this is a problem for churches because more than ever, I think people need to be assembling together with other believers, exhorting one another and praying because of the things that are coming on the earth. I saw this graphic. I've seen this graphic a number of times. I don't think I've ever shared it. This is the bottom line. The white line at the bottom represents every chapter of the Bible. And the lines above are cross-references in the Bible. It's amazing. So like when you read the book of Revelation, 80 to 85% of that are direct allusion. That book is direct allusions to the Old Testament. That's why I would criticize Andy Stanley, who said you don't need the Old Testament. That's baloney. That's part of a heresy called Marcionism. That, well, we don't need the Old Testament. We're superior to that. And so what happens is, I mean, you see some people who hold to that view, they cut more out of the Bible than Thomas Jefferson did. Thomas Jefferson had a Bible that he cut out all the parts about the divinity of Jesus and the miracles and supernatural things that he didn't like. But you have some groups of people who say, well, just throw out the whole Old Testament or parts of the New Testament too. So I have a problem with that. This is an incredible book that God gave us and has preserved for us for thousands of years. As my friend Chuck Missler used to say, an integrated message, 66 books by 40 authors, completely integrated. In today's terminology, we would say it's hyperlinked. And that's just a great manifestation of it. So let's look at some of the things that are going on that relate to Bible prophecy. Now, I'm not going to get into the vaccine and all of those things. I will just say this. I see a lot of things being passed around as if they are on the order of Scripture. People's conclusions about the vaccine and the mark of the beast, and it's this or that. And a lot of times, like on the vaccine, some claims will be made, and I ask for, give me some verification for that written document, scientific paper, technical paper verification, and what I get is another video of people talking about the opinion of somebody else. And I wish I could find the one person who was the first person to express that opinion so I could trace it. And I'm concerned about that because I think it gets very distracting. But certainly we know that there are things going on. We have the World Economic Forum with their strategic intelligence website, now that part of it called the Great Reset. And it's clear that people have plans and they're using whatever crises are here now. And we do have a crisis. I mean, the coronavirus numbers are up. I know a lot of people don't think that any number about COVID virus is just fake. I don't agree with that. There are and have been very well documented spikes in daily deaths, much greater than anybody would have expected, which may or may not be related entirely to the COVID virus. I will acknowledge that, but something is going on. We have a major problem. Israel just locked down again. Everybody's locking down again. Economy is reeling. I just got since I had worked in the area of foreclosures and liquidations and bankruptcies for the last number of years of my legal career, I still get some email lists. And I got an email from someone who's liquidating a banquet center, stoves and ovens and 800 dining room chairs and hundreds of crystal, dining crystal sets, white, sort of off-white. It's just, but see, the problem with that is there are people that ran that business, that was their dream, and now that's shattered. And I look around some local restaurants like Max and Irma's and stuff. I think a couple are still open, but all the ones up around where we used to live are closed permanently. And so there are people that work there. There are people that had jobs. There are people that manage that. It's just devastating. But one of the things that's coming is this sort of universal identification system. And so this was an article that someone sent me this week from biometricupdate.com. The future of biometrics is in the palm of your hand, because what we're seeing is, everybody's concerned about, we've been concerned about facial recognition. I talked about the social media or social credit score out of China and the tracking that was done, facial recognition. Gets a little bit more difficult with a mask on. My proof of that is my iPhone, which uses facial recognition ID. If I pull it out in a store that requires a mask, now I got to enter my passcode or pull my mask down. And if you pull your mask down, of course, then everybody looks at you like you're Typhoid Mary or something, and you're trying to kill them. But here is what this article says. Artificial intelligence researchers and technology scholars are growing wary of facial recognition technology, and that's a good thing. Over the past few months, public concern has been increasing over the privacy abuse and racial bias of facial recognition systems, prompting calls for tech giants like IBM, Amazon, and Microsoft to stop selling this technology to customers, including law enforcement agencies. And they said it's well documented that non-Caucasian people are more likely to be misidentified. So facial recognition is not perfect. But if you walk around, I remember when Israel a few years ago, there were cameras everywhere. We were staying in an apartment near the old city, and there was an underground parking garage, and I turned the wrong way. I went further down in the garage, so I turned around and I came back up, and as I got to where my parking space was, there was a security guard going, "Are you having a problem? I saw you going the wrong way in the parking garage." And that was true everywhere you looked. There were cameras everywhere. And so the privacy of this is a problem, and people are, I guess, getting very concerned about it. One of the new norms that says this from COVID-19 will be people's unwillingness to touch keypads, scanners, and other devices for authentication and identification. Facial recognition solutions will not function due to the vast majority of the population wearing masks to mitigate the spread of the virus. Palm print recognition is touchless, fast, and reliable. The user simply shows their palm in front of a camera and is immediately authorized for easy and convenient transactions. Although I see movies where they kill someone and then they take them and they hold their palm up in front of it. So nothing's perfect. The use of biometrics for authentication and identification has exciting possibilities in industries ranging from banking and payments to healthcare, automotive, AR, VR, e-commerce, wearables, and more. Palm print biometrics is affordable and easy to implement at a large scale. I'm just looking at this in the terms of what somebody's going to roll out someday in terms of a mark of the beast. Once users are enrolled, they are immediately recognized on all of their devices, putting the future of biometrics in the palm of their hands. Now listen, I've been following Bible prophecy for the vast majority of my life, seriously. And I have heard many different theories about what the mark of the beast is. And so when I hear people saying the COVID-19 vaccine is the mark of the beast, I'm just adding that to the list. It's QR codes, it's barcodes, it was microchips. Now they're talking about nanochips and that type of thing. Listen, when it comes, it'll be perfectly clear to everybody what it is and what to avoid, because there will be an element to it, which is the worship of the beast, that is what is to be avoided. And so I think it'll be clear. And sure, I think it's okay to speculate some now, but what I don't agree with is pronouncements about this is that which was prophesied by the prophets. I think we need to, I've long advocated that people who speak on these subjects publicly, that there ought to be some kind of almost clearinghouse for whether your view is established in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, because I think we damage the whole enterprise of talking about Bible prophecy if we're a little bit too quick to use a term that we used to use, spiking the ball a little bit too early. Spiking the ball is what they did in football. Football was a game that people played. They actually had teams. They had stadiums. They had fans and cheerleaders and bands and vendors and people selling hot dogs and soft drinks and beer and parking lot attendants. you might not remember those days. I'm going to spend a little bit of time again today. This Black Lives Matter thing and the way that this is going, the overtaking the narrative, historical narrative, and making things up is very troubling to me. I believe in objectivity and truth. I believe Jesus believed in objectivity and truth. And as I mentioned before, I started talking about postmodernism 20 years ago and the effect that it was going to have on the church. And now that seems sort of like a little quaint notion. And now we see something like this neo-Marxist social justice warrior ideology, cult religion taking over everywhere. And it is a cult, it is a religion. A lot of it started with the 1619 Project put out by the New York Times last year, and that's now being taught in schools. I'm going to share with some things to you today. It was significant enough that the other night when he was talking about human rights, Secretary Mike Pompeo had this to say about the 1619 Project.
The New York Times, 1619 Project, so named for the year that the first slaves were transported to America, wants you to believe that our country was founded for human bondage. They want you to believe that America's institutions continue to reflect the country's acceptance of slavery at our founding. They want you to believe that Marxist ideology, that America is only the oppressors and the oppressed. The Chinese Communist Party must be gleeful when they see the New York Times spout this ideology. Some people have taken these false doctrines to heart. The rioters pulling down statues thus see nothing wrong with desecrating monuments to those who fought for our unalienable rights, from our founding to the present day. This is a dark vision of America's birth. I reject it. It's a disturbed reading of our history. It is a slander on our great people.
And he's right. And this is working its way into all sorts of things. Here's an article from the Columbus Dispatch. City tries to probe police biases. In Wednesday's Columbus Dispatch. The Columbus City Council will draft new legislation before the end of July that could give the city more power to investigate active officers' ongoing affiliations and biases. And I know from talking to people that work for the Columbus Police Department, they have had to change their names on social media. Their families have had to change their names. They cannot say where they work because they're being monitored. And if they say something that doesn't agree with the new religion, the high priest, Mayor Ginther, and his sub-priests on the city council, they're gone, they're toast. Their career is over. And this is happening all over the place. There's an actress, and her husband had posted that I think he supported the president, he was conservative, and there's been a social media storm brought against her to get her fired from everything and sort of erased from human history, because how dare she have a husband like that? She should divorce him, kick him to the curb. And so listen to this. So Councilwoman Shayla Favor, who chairs the Criminal Justice Committee, emphasized that the council isn't saying police are bad people. Baloney. Listen, you can almost assume that everybody who adopts this ideology is a liar at their core. But at the same time, she says, we cannot ignore the public outcry that is before us right now, she said of protests in Columbus and nationwide over racial injustices by police and the deaths of blacks such as George Floyd during police encounters. The autopsy is out there of George Floyd. Have you seen the media talk about this? I can tell you now, more than any week, I hear a story, and I always try to confirm it with several sources before I bring it to you. And over again this week, I've came across stories that were in the mainstream media were never mentioned, except by maybe a couple of media outlets. And it's getting worse. But listen to this. What Columbus is going to do is going to use the hate organization list drawn up by the Southern Poverty Law Center to see that if any police belong to that, if you are applying for a police job and you belong to one of those organizations identified by the Southern Poverty Law Center, you won't get hired. If you're working as a policeman, you will be fired. And I know I've talked about this before, the Southern Poverty Law Center, it is a hate group. It is the very definition of a hate group. It's well-funded. There's nothing in it about poverty or law. It is ideologically driven. They have hundreds of millions of dollars that they've accumulated over the time, most in offshore banking accounts, so people can't really determine what they are. But it's pretty clear they have vast wealth, much more than any church that I know of in America would have. They've identified some people here locally that are hate groups, and I know these people, and they are not hate groups. They are against abortion. They are in favor of traditional marriage. And so if you support that as a Columbus police officer, and this thing gets passed by the city council, and it probably will, your job's at risk for supporting traditional marriage. And this is going to seep into private employment, where you don't have some of the protections you do if it's a public agency that's involved. The Southern Poverty Law Center, which monitors extremist organizations, has identified 1,000 hate groups nationally, and there are likely more operating under the radar, said Judson Jeffries, professor of African American, African Studies at Ohio State University. By the way, somebody should go ask Professor Jeffries, if America is so bad, why have black Africans immigrated to the United States over the last decade or two at a rate many, many more times than the slaves that were brought here? Why are they voluntarily coming to a racist place? It makes no sense. And listen, I'm against racism. I'm against slavery. It's a dark blot on our history. But this is not about that. This is about tearing down everything. Jeffrey said, history has shown that some groups operate in a clandestine manner, noting that about 50 hate groups operate in Ohio. The committee got an extensive review from the Division of Police, the Columbus Civil Service Commission, and a psychology firm hired by the division to assess officer recruits and how it screens for characteristics that might be problematic. We're looking for stability, said Dr. Jennifer Webb, a psychologist who does the screening. No, they're not looking for stability. They're looking at someone who will toe the current ideological cult line. During lengthy interviews where recruits can become comfortable talking, interviewers are on the lookout for any racist views that a candidate might let slip out. One question recruits have to answer. At any time in your life, have you ever committed a hate crime? They must respond either yes or no, said the manager of the background investigation unit. Now listen, what happened with Southern Poverty Law Center, the Obama administration, if you go back to my update from probably in 2015, I don't know which one, I seem to recall it was in the summer, there was a joint Southern Poverty Law Center, it was either George Washington or Georgetown University conference that they had, and they had a speaker from the Obama-led Department of Justice at the time, and what they were doing was they were doing exactly what the city of Columbus was doing at the Department of Justice under the Obama administration. They were taking the Southern Poverty Law Center hate list to identify people to target with FBI investigations and that sort. So this has been going on for a long time. And you can see the lady, I seem to recall she was blonde and white, who was talking about hate and how this was a great thing and this was doing it. And I can't remember if it was held at Georgetown or George Washington. They're both heavily funded by Muslim countries and money. And if you remember when Obama, I think it was Obama, went to give a speech at one of these places, they had a symbol up that represented Jesus Christ on the platform, and they covered it up. A Catholic university, by the way. I think that was Georgetown. So don't tell me that this is not ideological. And a lot of this goes back to the Obama administration, and I'm way off topic here, but this is all connected. The scrutiny on this, why they want the Southern Poverty Law Center information, is in response to what city officials overwhelmingly saw as over-aggressive Columbus police tactics during protests and riots that began downtown May 28, 3 days after Floyd's death. And Friday afternoon, I got an email. Don't come to the office this weekend. Don't come downtown. Was that because the police would be on patrol? You think that's the reason? No, that's not the reason. So I don't think anything's happened, but people are concerned about it. This is an opinion from Newsweek. America was conceived in racism. Here's an example. This is in Chicago, Grant Park. Tearing down a Columbus statue. They're throwing firecrackers, rocks, and debris at the police who are protecting the statue. You see that? That one guy, he should play for the Cubs. He's pretty good. Anyway, this is what's happening. And they later were able to break through the police line and started to tear it down. Earlier this week, the New York Times Magazine had an article by Robin DiAngelo called Whiteness Lessons. What do you think that's about? She wrote a book called White Fragility. In early June, Robin DiAngelo addressed 184 Democratic members of Congress who had gathered by conference call for what the party leadership had named a Democratic caucus family discussion on race. It was 10 days after the George Floyd incident. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, gave introductory remarks, and soon DiAngelo began saying this. For all the white people listening right now, thinking I'm not talking to you, she had a message. I'm looking directly in your eyes and saying, it is you. She cautioned the white office holders not to think that because they marched in the 1960s or served a diverse district or had a black roommate at college, they were exempt from self-examination. Until they reckon with the question of what it means to be white, they would continue to enact policies and practices, intentionally or not, that hurt and limit black lives. There's a Museum of Black History and Culture. It's part of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. This is a picture of the museum. They had this section on their website talking about race, whiteness, and then they go through a large checklist of how you can determine what things are white and things that are foreign to people that are black, I guess, that they don't understand or they don't get or it's not part of their culture. So I'm going to share some of those with you. I'll try not to editorialize, but that's kind of a... And so here is this, and you can find it if you go to Byron York's from the Washington Examiner's Twitter account. You can find these and just look them up. Aspects and assumptions of whiteness and white culture in the United States. White dominant culture or whiteness refers to the ways white people and their traditions, attitudes, and ways of life have been normalized over time and are now considered standard practices in the United States. And since white people still hold most of the institutional power in America, we have internalized some aspects of white culture, including people of color. As I was reading this, Matthew chapter 24, where Jesus warned that in the end times, ethnos would rise against ethnos. This is fostering that, and it's fostering on a scale that I don't think any of us had ever thought we would see. And I will say, I think this is very demeaning to the black people they claim to love. Because I know a lot of black people who hold to these values, and they'll just say, well, you're just playing white. There's a video out right now by Larry Elder, Salem, called Uncle Tom. I've not seen it. I've heard nothing but good about it. I actually knew Larry when he was in Cleveland. Got to spend a little bit of time with him about 30 years ago. And I will say, Larry Elder is a prince of a human being. He is, like I said, it was a professional type relationship, but I'm just telling you, I have tremendous respect for that guy. So listen, these are some of the things about white culture that are, I guess, not acceptable. The rugged individualism. The individual's primary unit, self-reliance, independence, and autonomy are highly valued and rewarded. Individuals assume to be in control of their environment. You get what you deserve. Family structure. Okay, this is what's not, I guess they're running down white culture for having this. This is whiteness. This is foreign to us. The nuclear family, father, mother, 2.3 children is the ideal social unit. Husband is the breadwinner and head of the household. Wife is homemaker and subordinate to the husband. Come by my house in Galena sometime. We'll see who's subordinate to who. I often joke with my wife. You've been 45 years of trying to erase all evidence of my existence. She's always putting my stuff away. Where is that? Well, I thought you were done with it. Emphasis. This is so shocking to me. This is the Black History Museum sponsored by your tax dollars. Paid for by your tax dollars. Using that as a forum for education outreaches. Emphasis on the scientific method. Objective, rational, linear thinking, cause and effect relationships, quantitative emphasis. I guess it's wrong, or it's just like, well, this is what you guys do, but we don't need to do that. What was it one apologist said? Even the dualist in the Buddhist or Hindu community look both ways before, or the oneness people that believe we're all one, they still look both ways when they cross the street. Protestant work ethic. Hard work is the key to success. Work before play. Here's some more. Religion. Christianity is the norm. Anything other than Judeo-Christian tradition is foreign. No tolerance. By the way, to an American, if you understand the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Judeo tradition is foreign. To America, you understand what I'm saying? It came from someplace else. It was brought here. No tolerance for deviation from a single God concept. Status, power, and authority, wealth equals work. Future orientation, plan for the future, delayed gratification. Progress is always best. So what I'm saying is the opposite of this is what I see tearing down statues all over America and protesting in the street. These people have been educated in a religious cult. Aesthetics, based on a European culture. Steak and potatoes, bland is best. I had spicy barbecue last night, I want you to know. Women's beauty is based on blonde, thin Barbie. This is just not, sure there are racist white people, there's no denying that, but for goodness gracious people. Justice, based on English common law, protect property and entitlements, intent counts. One meme that I saw, I think, summed up communication, the King English rules, written tradition, avoid conflict, don't show emotion, don't discuss personal life, be polite. I think this was the best meme of the week that I saw, judging what that was. Christopher Rufo has written enough. I mentioned his article from City Journal last week where he talked about how this is a religious cult. And he followed up this week. So he posted some things like, here's a new, he went through the job postings for the city of Seattle. And this is, by the way, where that Robin DiAngelo, who wrote that book, White Fragility, is from. And I'll have to talk more about that in the future. But here, look at what they want. This is for the Director of Administrative Services, and one of the requirements is knowledgeable in the area of race and social justice and developing policies with stakeholder involvement for better community and staff equity. That's Seattle. This is Christopher Rufo tweeting this week. Critical race theory is spreading rapidly through the federal government. Last week, a whistleblower sent me a trove of documents about a divisive diversity training at the Treasury Department. What I discovered is deeply disturbing and an affront to equality. Buckle up. By the way, Christopher Rufo is the director of the Discovery Institute's Center on Wealth and Poverty. And I like a lot of what the Discovery Institute does. Here he is the other night on Laura Ingraham talking a little bit about what he found out.
Whistleblower sent him a treasure trove of documents last week about diversity training that's held at the U.S. Treasury Department. The lecture the employees received was called Difficult Conversations About Race, which included helpful advice like virtually all white people contribute to racism, and that white employees must accept their, quote, unconscious bias, white privilege, and white fragility. Joining me now is the man who uncovered this shocking waste of taxpayer dollars. It's an outrage. Christopher Rufo, contributing editor at City Journal. Chris, I learned about this when I saw your tweet on Twitter. It's unbelievable. Do you think programs like this, are they contained to the Treasury Department? They must be government-wide, yes?
Yeah, they're absolutely government-wide. And in fact, the person who conducted this training session, Howard Ross, has billed taxpayers more than $5 million conducting dozens of these kind of trainings throughout the federal government. He did, for example, a $3 million training for the GSA and a $500,000 training for NASA, which he was calling Power and Privilege Sexual Orientation Workshops. So this is something that is running rampant. And rather than curtailing this kind of thing, in the past 3 years since President Trump took office, it's simply accelerated through the bureaucracy.
Well, I think the bureaucracy in the swamp, they don't want to let go of this stuff. They want to keep it going. Chris, this is from the diversity training documents that you found. I mentioned some of these statements earlier. It reads, watch Robin DiAngelo on YouTube, the author of White Fragility. She talks about how white people struggle to own their racism. She asserts all white people, virtually all white people, regardless of how woke they are, contribute to racism. And here's an example of what they expect employees to learn from DiAngelo's videos. Watch.
My psychosocial development was inculcated in the water of white supremacy. The default of our society is the reproduction of racism.
Wonder what happened there. Somebody didn't want that one to be seen. Okay. I'm not sure. I've been having some issues with PowerPoint here. Sorry about this. It may be that there's some kind of code built into some of the video that I have in my presentation. So, well, anyway, you get the point from what Christopher Rufo was saying. You can find that on his Twitter feed. Excellent, excellent stuff. So here's another article. This, I believe I found at American Progress by, I think his name is Kimball, George Kimball, Robert Kimball. Our worship of power over truth. It's an assessment of where we are right now. And this is all about power. It's not about truth or anything like that. This is about taking over. And he said this, and I actually think I might have said this a few weeks ago. Orwell intended 1984 as a warning and admonition. Our woke social justice warriors, supposing they are even aware of Orwell's work, would seem to regard it as a plan of action or a how-to manual. He also cites the case of Andrew Sullivan, who is a gay liberal. I think I would call him a traditional liberal author. I don't agree with a lot of what he says, but he's a fairly good thinker and writer. Been writing for New York Magazine for a while. And he quit, or he got fired. Because he had said this: revolutionaries also create new forms of language to dismantle the existing order. And so what happened was people just decided, we can't have him around working here because it makes it an unsafe space for us. And we just can't work with somebody who thinks that way. Barry Weiss, who was an editor at the New York Times, a Jewish lady, I don't even know what her political orientation is. I would say at least center left. But she resigned this week because she had said some things to support Israel. And that was considered verboten at the New York Times. And she said it was so uncomfortable she had to quit. This is happening all over the place. It's public, it's known. I think it has clear end times implications. I mentioned this a few years ago. Remember when Pope Francis came and spoke at Congress? He's more leftist than Catholic. He is. I mean, and who did he cite? He cited Martin Luther King. He cited Dorothy Day, who is a radical leftist. And he cited Merton, a mystic monk. So this is North Carolina town votes to pay reparations to black residents. Asheville, North Carolina is going to pay reparations. They're talking about it. Maybe they should just sell the Biltmore mansion and spread the money around. Yeah. Listen to this. This is what the New York, or this council, organization of mayors of the United States adopted with regard to, it said would be good, they think would be a good idea for reparations. After reparations studies suggest $151 million for each African American. That's what they say. That's based in large part on a Brookings Policy Institution. By the way, the total cost is something like $6.2 quadrillion. Now, if they distributed that much money, what would happen? You'd have vast inflation, would you not? It would ruin the value of everybody else's money. Even the $151 million would end up being worth like $10,000. It's insanity. Why we need reparations, and they talk about this. They actually came up with this formula based on an article published in June, Wealth Implications of Slavery and Racial Discrimination for African American Descendants of the Enslaved. And this is the formula that they've come up with to determine how much. And T equals 1618. Well, what's 1618? That's the year before 1619. So you have 400 years of stuff with interest and that type of thing. Dinesh D'Souza said this in a little piece he put up on his website. They're not coming. Well, here's what he says.
This contemporary crisis is now taking a very disturbing and I would say even dangerous new turn. It started with statues and monuments. Let's attack those. But now the left has gone from attacking those things to attacking us in the process of living our normal lives and exercising our basic constitutional liberties. I'm talking about our ability to speak freely, our ability to practice our religion as we see fit. We see in these videos Black Lives Matter trying to intimidate a young mom trying to take her kids to church. Just bullying her in the process of doing that. And second of all, we see Black Lives Matter entering a church, using foul language, pushing around the people in the pews, and essentially a wholesale assault on religious freedom.
Don't touch it, bro. Don't touch it. No, back up. Back up. You're not going to do that, boy. You crazy? Shut up. Let's go. Put your hands up. Let's go. Put your hands up. Word. Come on. Crazy, boy. Ah, knock your shit, boy. It does, bro. This is not. No, bro. Nah, bro. That's not.
This is not a case where they are in the public space making a point. They are not protesters. They are terrorists in the very literal sense that they are trying to terrorize us into submission. Now, it makes no sense to say things like, they hate America. They don't hate America. It begs the question, which America? They like the America of abortion on demand. They like the America where anything goes. They like the America of transgender bathrooms and racial unrest. They don't like our America. They don't like property rights. They don't like religious freedom. So it's those things that they are targeting for assault. Now, it's important to realize that our basic freedoms, the freedoms outlined in the Bill of Rights, are not up for democratic referendum. It's not as if 90% of people get to decide how I should think or what religion I should practice. I haven't ceded those rights to the government in the first place. And yet it's those very rights that are now under assault. An assault not even by some democratic majority through a process of law, but assault by essentially street gangs, but street gangs with friends in high places, street gangs who have allies in the media and in Hollywood, and friends in the mayor's office in Berkeley, in Portland, and even New York City. It's very important for us to start fighting back against all this. And what this might mean is that churches need to start hiring armed security. In a sense, creating our own militias to protect us in the exercise of our basic rights. We can't allow this to go on, and if the government won't protect us, well, we're just going to have to.
In Portland, they've been having protests, and a lot of people, I think the president or somebody called it a city under siege, and of course, in this morning's Oregonian, the Sunday Oregonian out of Portland, they said, well, we drove around the neighborhoods, they were just fine. I don't know what they're talking about. And they said, and so there was this lawsuit started. Some people got arrested. There were people came in camouflage, unmarked vehicles. Oh, how dare they come in an unmarked vehicle? This is so, how dare they? That was a pretty brilliant move. Oregon Attorney General sues federal agencies for allegedly violating protesters' civil rights. Lawsuit filed in the United States District Court for the District of Oregon. Oh, by the way, here is a reason, one picture that will tell you why maybe they're driving unmarked vehicles. A friend sent me this morning. This is a notice to airmen. Says, no flights above downtown Portland starting July 16th and going till August 16th includes drones. And the Department of Homeland Security is in charge of the airspace over Portland, downtown Portland. That suggests that maybe something's going down there, that maybe somebody's had it. Of course, the mayor comes out and says, "Oh, we don't want these federal police here." But this, I think, is okay to the mayor. So just watch Portland, Seattle, because that seems to be a little bit of the epicenter of this. Now I'm going to go kind of quickly through some Middle East stuff, each topic of which could be an hour or two. Somebody sent me a message this week, one of my Weisenheimer friends. God has blessed me with a lot of Weisenheimer friends, and he said, it's nice that you're moving this week. That means that, we'll be able to keep the update to an hour and 45 minutes. Ha, ha, ha. But he might be right. Last week, I think it was just over an hour, and Nobody called and wanted to know if I was sick or dying or anything like that. But so this is a report that came out from a thing called the Alma Research and Education Center in Israel. And what they did was they went through and they analyzed it. You can download the report and read it all if you want. It's about 30 some pages long, about Hezbollah missile sites. And so what's happening with Hezbollah, we've known this for years. Israel's known this for years. They put them under a school or a hospital or that type of thing. And so that's why when you see things blowing up in Iran, I'll get to that in just a minute, you'll see a hospital blew up in Iran or caught on fire in Iran. Well, there's probably a nuclear research facility underneath it. So they harden, they put targets that make people say, well, they won't attack us. They won't attack the children. So we use them as human shields. And this is the way they think. So Hezbollah has been doing this, and they have at least 28 identified missile sites throughout northern Israel and launch sites, and they put in where those locations are and that type of thing. And I mentioned to you also a couple weeks ago that what they're doing is they're planting trees along the border wall, knowing that the trees will eventually grow up and block the view from lookout posts and that type of thing. Here's a little video that our good friends at Hezbollah released recently, a couple weeks ago, about what they intend to do to Israel.
إننا اليوم لسنا فقط قادرين على ضرب تل أبيب كمدينة، وإنما إن شاء الله وبحول الله وقوته قادرون على ضرب أهداف محددة جدا في تل أبيب بل في أي مكان من فلسطين محتل.
That's a settlement. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on here. So anyway, that's what they're doing. Seth Frantzman, if you want to track somebody who's got a really good handle on what's going on in the Middle East, Seth Frantzman he writes for the Jerusalem Post. He's I think he's the op-ed editor there. He also has his own website, writes for other outlets. This is from SethFrantzman.com. This is a map of all the little different unexplained explosions, fires, and that sort of thing that have been going on in Iran over the past 3 weeks. And the number grows every day, and sometimes they're happening simultaneously. No one seems to take care of it. Recently, there was a blaze at the port, 7 ships caught on fire. There were also, these happened either yesterday or this morning, our time in Iran. These are just different facilities that are on fire, some related to nuclear weapons, other related to oil and gas. And they're happening with some frequency and regularity. So by the time I finished this talk, there might have been 2 or 3 more. Now, nobody knows exactly who's doing it. Israel has been very coy in saying who did it. They asked Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and he says, well, I can't tell you who did it. That's classified information. But the other thing, and the Jerusalem Post had a tweet here yesterday about a large fire broke out at the Alchemics chemical plant near the Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta on Saturday, the latest in a series of fires reported in the past week at industrial sites and a naval vessel in the U.S. Remember the pictures of the naval vessel in San Diego Harbor that was on fire. And now we're seeing fires. There's like a couple facilities up in northwest Indiana. There's Atlanta. There's just a number of these that people are tracking, and it's like, what is going on? I think something's going on. I think there's a below the surface war going on. Israel and Iran are at war right now. There's just no mistake about that. And it's interesting, there's been these attacks on the nuclear facilities, and the mantra of the Obama administration and Kerry, and why we got to give Iran that $150 billion, and why we got to enter into the JCPOA, which is not joint. It's not the joint agreement. It all favors Israel, and John Kerry running around, we got to help out Iran and all this other stuff. Listen, this ignores what's going on. And so I think, are at war. And they always said, Kerry always would say, If Israel dares to attack a nuclear facility in Iran, the world will come to an end. Well, let's assume that this was Israel. It's been going on for 3 weeks now. There are cyber attacks back and forth. So it's a low-level warfare right now. There were strikes in northeast Syria overnight. Nobody knows exactly who did them, but there were casualties at Iranian and Syrian outposts. This is in Nantes, France, Cathedral of St. Peter and Paul burning. The organ was burned up. Is that terrorism related? Is this another church like the Cathedral of Notre Dame that's going to burn down? Nobody knows yet. There's no answers. This is Orly Airport in Paris this morning, having a bit of a fire there. And this seems to be happening in a whole bunch of places. All I can say is you need to be very observant and careful when you're in high traffic, high profile areas. This is another interesting thing. I mentioned last week that Iran and China had entered into a 25-year agreement. China's getting some cheap labor. Iran's getting a market for their oil that they can't sell elsewhere. They're going around the sanctions. And then this week, this is a video of an event that happened in Damascus. And you see the picture of Bashar Assad there, that they are signing a deal between Iran and Syria about how they're going to handle things. Here's a little, I don't have any audio in this. This is just a captioned video. This is the Bagheri, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander who went to Damascus to sign this as part of a military deal signed between the Allies on Wednesday in Damascus. Iran's chief of staff made these remarks during the signing ceremony with the Syrian defense minister. The agreement aims to enhance military and security cooperation between Syria and Iran on all levels. I declare that Iran will enforce the military relations between both countries, including the Syrian air defenses. Honestly, the axis of resistance, Iran, Syria, and Lebanon's Hezbollah group, has strongly reacted to such Israeli violations. For his side, the Syrian defense minister hailed the importance of the strategic Iranian-Syrian relations to the Middle East. Now, we all talk about the Bible prophecies about Ezekiel 38 and 39. And so you see a lot of these things coming to fruition. I don't think that war is imminent by any stretch of the imagination, but you see a lot of these chess pieces being moved in place on the chessboard so that it can take place in the near future. And it says here that will strengthen Syrian air defenses. And so what happened was, this is from the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, a great website, paper published this week, tightening military cooperation between Iran and Syria. Iran and Syria have signed a military agreement that establishes Iran's military involvement in Syria and strengthens Syrian air defense capability. Syrian officials say the agreement is in response to the U.S. Caesar Syria Civilian Protection Act and a hint at escalation vis-a-vis Israel. Listen, there's been tremendous sanctions put on the Syrian ruling elite, the Alawites especially, and the Assad family. A lot of their money and assets have been frozen. They can't get to them. And it's caused tremendous economic hardship in Syria. And the hope is that this economic hardship would cause the people to rise up and overthrow Assad, but I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen. There's also a picture in the article of the Ayatollah Khamenei showing a sort of what Russia has done is they've not allowed the Syrians to have the S-300s to use against Israeli airstrikes. So Iran has taken the Russian S-300 and sort of repurposed it, reimagined it, if you will, into another, it has an Iranian name now, it's an Iranian 300 air defense system. And so that's all part of this deal, because they're saying we're going to stop all this stuff that Israel is doing. There's, like as I said, the economic sanctions have been tremendous. One of the Revolutionary Guard people commenting back in Tehran on the agreement said this: the rules of the conflict will change. So Iran is making plans for something in response, and you can expect that. They've been very coy about it yet. They haven't really said what has caused these things. According to Syrian sources, Russia refused to give a green light to the Syrian President Assad's use of the Russian 300 systems that have been in Syria for more than a year. There's also the economic sanctions have been so severe. The Syrian government ruling elite have about $40 billion is estimated parked in banks around the world. That's now money has been frozen. Because that money has been frozen, that's putting pressure on Hezbollah. That's putting pressure, the banking financial system has collapsed in Lebanon. People are starving. It's a very serious situation. So at the same time, all that is going on in Syria, and Russia is kind of like, at this point, Russia thought they would be getting nice, big, multi-billion-dollar contracts to rebuild Syria. But nobody's going to finance the rebuilding of Syria until there's some kind of stability. And it's anything but stable. This has been going on for 9.5 years now. It's probably going to go on for a bit longer. Who knows whether it will be resolved or how it will be resolved. And the cities, a lot of the cities in Syria lie in ruins, and the population may be half of what it was a few years ago. So this is, but Gary said this at the ceremony: whoever bets on destroying the connection between Damascus and Tehran is living in a delusion and needs to wake up from their dreams. The political advisor to President Bashar Assad said that the new military agreement between Syria and Iran is intended to confront the U.S. Caesar Act sanctions and strengthen the coordination in the axis of resistance, which includes Hezbollah and Lebanon. So at the same time all this is going on, there is this constant back and forth in the Eastern Mediterranean. Now we know that Israel, in their economic zone, the Leviathan, the two fields that they've found, gas fields, Tamar and Leviathan, are starting to produce. Israel wants to take that gas, pipe it up to Cyprus and then across to Greece. Turkey doesn't want that to happen. In part, they don't want that to happen because they want the pipelines to go across them and collect the transit fees and taxes that would come along with it. So they entered into this, I've talked about this maritime zone agreement with Libya. Interestingly enough, Turkey supports the Libyan National Army, which is in the western part of Libya. It doesn't even control that part where they entered into an agreement. So the General Haftar and his group that controls that area of Libya says that the Turkish agreement is not valid and it can't be used to block Israel or anybody else from piping their oil across. So here's what's happening now. Turkey has also entered into an agreement for an economic zone like that from Gaza to Turkey to make another block on Israel coming through that area. In addition to that, Egypt is now getting involved. They've sent troops. There's a war going on in Libya right now. Egypt has sent troops into Libya. They're fighting the Turks, or the Turk mercenaries. What the Turks did was they took soldiers from people from Syria and moved them to Libya to fight their battle. Erdogan wants to recreate the Ottoman Empire. And all of this part that you see there was part of the Ottoman Empire for 400 years, roughly 400 years. Lebanon, they claim a little bit of what Israel claims because of how does that line there from between Israel and Lebanon, does it angle up to the north or does it go straight? And there's a lot of gas in that area, so this is a big deal, and they're trying to resolve that issue. But now who do you deal with in Lebanon because the government has effectively collapsed? Egypt is at war. Egypt is having the problem with the dam from Ethiopia, which they started to fill this week, of the Nile. longest river in the world. Ethiopia says we want our share. The colonialists came in here and took it away and gave it to Egypt because the British had a bigger interest in Egypt than they did in Ethiopia. So now Egypt and Ethiopia may be getting into it. Egypt also went and entered into one of these economic zone agreements with Greece, because they have gas too that they want to ship through this pipeline up to Europe. Now this pipeline is going to take 5 or 6 years to build. So, and that's going to affect Russia. So that's, if I tried to show all the interconnected lines, it would look like a bowl of spaghetti. It's very interesting. So here's a little bit. This is a picture of the Israeli interest and how Turkey is trying to make claims on Cyprus. They took over part of Cyprus, and now Erdogan is using that to extend his economic territorial waters out to include these gas fields. And Cyprus doesn't like that. So I suspect there will be some at least terrorist or violence there with that regard. It's very chaotic. The U.S. sanctions on Syria, very good article at the Crisis Group. I don't really have time to go into that right now, but it just says this: according to Damascus and some of its foreign supporters, Western sanctions are mostly to blame for eviscerating the population in Syria, 83% of whom now live below the poverty line. Yet Syria's economic decay cannot be attributed exclusively or even mainly to these sanctions. But it is having an impact. And as I mentioned, the banking system in Lebanon has collapsed, and this is also now putting pressure on Russia, because Russia has interest in Syria that wants to protect. It has bases and that sort of thing now. But now Lebanon is becoming a failed state. So what's the result of that going to be? And Israel's concerned about that too, because Hezbollah may shore up its control of southern Lebanon and use that as an opportunity to do missile attacks on Syria. They put videos about this is where we intend to target. And we have thousands of missiles that can do that. It is, to say that I just find this to be very chaotic. Turkey and Greece are having diplomatic talks because they're on the verge of war, because Erdogan's taken over some of the islands in the Aegean Sea, claiming that those are really Turkish islands. At the same time, this is happening. This is from this morning's Arab News out of Saudi Arabia. So this is the point. I know that people look at what I do and they criticize me and say, oh, you're just obsessed with the news. I really want to understand the times in which I live. I think that's okay to do. But then the other thing that I always notice too is the Arab News is not a Christian Bible prophecy newspaper. Now they have an eschatology, it's Islamic. But you see how they use the terms plague of epic proportions with the locusts coming in? And now they're saying that whatever happened with the locusts before, because of the weather and wet and heat and that type of thing, the next locust invasion could be 90 times greater than what happened before. Now, what's that going to do? That causes food supply problems. China's having flooding in Southeast Asia because China's has been shutting off the water. They have a drought, so they have food problems. China's having food problems. China's entered into this agreement with Iran to essentially build this highway to the Mediterranean. This all sounds very biblical, apocalyptic to me, as I understand Bible prophecy. Israel today will approve the East Med gas pipeline project. There's also been concern, protests, this is again from the Arab News, either yesterday or today. I think it's today. Protest over Israeli land grab in Nablus. And those are Palestinians that are protesting, or there are protests going on in Nablus, which has really been one of the epicenter where a lot of the suicide bombers came from that attacked Israel during the intifadas that took place a little over a decade ago. And we were there, when we were there 3 years ago, they had riots the day before. So as we drove down the street in Nablus to go to Shechem, You could see piles of a burned out car that had burned the day before and piles of tires that had burned. Now, we were there, fortunately, and then when we left Shechem, we got stopped at a checkpoint by the Israeli soldiers. And they said, you guys, you shouldn't be in Shechem. It's not safe. And we said, that's why we're leaving. And they go, well, we can't leave unless you let us leave, though. And they eventually let us through the checkpoint. But it was kind of a bit dicey. You know, there's no hotels in Nablus that you would want to stay in overnight. And we're listening all the time driving through Nablus, we're listening to the Friday morning prayers and preachers at the mosque over the loudspeakers. And they're not, I don't understand Arabic, but I'm pretty sure that there was not love your neighbor as yourself message coming over those loudspeakers, given the level of the rhetoric. So this is where we are. There was so much going on this week that it's hard to understand, or hard to make a lot of sense of it, because it's just everywhere you look, you go down a rabbit trail. And I do think we live at a very significant time of history, of biblical history. We see chaos. I will say that I think that this fall will be very difficult. There was a congressional primary election in New York City. Elliot Engel lost to a radical leftist. That election took place 4 weeks ago in a Democratic primary. Because of write-in ballots, they just finally announced the winner yesterday. Now, I want you to translate that to every precinct and voting place in America in a presidential election. I think I said this, when the electors meet to elect the president in early January, my guess is that half the state's presidential election results will not be known. That just means more chaos. I don't think you've seen anything yet till you've seen what's going to happen with this election. So listen, our hope is not in governments of this world. Our hope is in Jesus Christ, who has promised that he will return. If we depart this life under even very bad circumstances, we're with the Lord. If he returns and raptures us, we're with the Lord. Same result. And what we need to do, though, is be sure that what we do in our lives and walk glorifies the Lord. What did the verse say at the beginning? To provoke to love and good works. That's what we should be about, sharing the gospel with people, telling them that Jesus came, lived the perfect life, died on a cross, rose the third day, and if you believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, you will be saved. And your future for all eternity will be secure. Someday we'll look back and think, why did we worry about that stuff? But listen, I acknowledge it's chaotic. It really is. It's strange. It is just a strange dystopian world that we live in now. And I think we will live in that until we pass on or the Lord returns. But God is in control and we can rest in that. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word. Pray that you will bless us this week. Help us to remember that you are in control and that you have told us how this ends. Jesus returns and rules and reigns for 1,000 years. We look forward to that day. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.